Well, this evening we're going to be looking in the scriptures starting in Genesis chapter 18. It's one of these passages that it's unusual because we have God appearing here in the Old Testament to his servant Abraham. And Genesis 18 and 19 are very important chapters, and we see a lot about God's relationship with people. We see what God has to say about sin. We see some very harsh realities of those who refuse to repent, to refuse to get right with God, to obey Him. We see what happens when you compromise and the things that could happen in a situation. We want to look in Genesis 18 tonight, and in the first verse there it says, "And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day." So Abraham is in Mamre. Now, if you have a book there on page 21, you see an outline there of the map, and you'll see where Mamre is. It's to the west of the Dead Sea, and that's going to be important. You see on chapter 19, there's a city of Sodom is on the east down east and south of the Dead Sea. So all those places, if you want to look and see the locations of this times in chapter 18 and 19, is very important. So the Lord appeared unto him. Now this is, we understand, as we've talked about, when the appearance of God in the Old Testament, theophany, the appearance of the Lord. As you notice there in your Bible, you probably will see the word Lord all capitalized, which indicates that it's the word for Jehovah, Yahweh, used exclusively for the Lord. And the Lord had a couple angels with him, and he lifted up his eyes and looked. And lo, 3 men stood by him, and when he saw them, he ran to meet them at the tent door and bowed himself toward the ground. And we see the hospitality of Abraham. He was a very hospitable man. He always was very respectful. You know, Abraham was a rich man and a powerful man, but it didn't make him any less of a very humble person. That's a good lesson, that no matter who we are, we can respect people. And he said, Lord, and that's not a capital there, and so in that passage there, he's just referring to them with respect. It's a respectful understanding to the people. "If now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not here, I pray thee, from thy servant, let a little water, I pray you, and be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the trees, and I'll fetch a morsel of bread, and comfort your hearts after you shall pass on. Therefore are you come to your servant?" And they said, "So do, and thou hast said." Abraham hastened to the tent of Sarah, and make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth. And Abraham ran out into the herd and fetched a calf tender and good, and gave it unto the young man, and he hastened to dress it. He took butter and milk and the calf which he had dressed, and set before them, and he stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. As you see down through here, we see Abraham going out of his way to make a very good stay here. And at first, it's not understood whether he just refers to them as guests. I think later on he refers to them, understands he's in the presence of the Lord there. And but he's...
The word was capitalized in the Bible.
Pardon?
The word Lord was capitalized in the Bible.
Yeah, in the first one there, but it's not in all of them. Not all of them is Jehovah. There's other word for Lord that signifies even to people that's not Lord God. That is given
when he asked where his wife Sarah was, maybe that was kind of a dead giveaway.
Yeah, because we're going to get into this situation here where we know that he knows his God here visiting. And but at first he's just being hospitable. You know, he's taking care of their needs. He's washing their feet, because it's something people do to help their guests. It's he's feeding them. He's meeting their needs, just being a servant to them and sharing what he had. Just being that way. So he gets down there and again in verse number 19, he said, "Where's Sarah thy wife?" He said, "Behold, in the tent." And verse 10, and he said, "I will certainly return unto thee according to thine time of life, and lo, and Sarah thy wife shall have a son." Okay? And Sarah heard it in the tent door which was behind him. Now we know that, this has been this long conversation that God's had with Abraham. So, at this point he knows that the Lord is with him, and he's come to him now. And Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age, and had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. She was past. This was a miraculous birth that God was promising. And then here in verse 12, now last chapter we looked at there, we saw when God spoke to Abraham about having his son still with Sarah, he laughed. Remember, he had his laughing spell? Well, now Sarah overhears the conversation. She's inside the tent, and the tent walls are not too thick, and he's on the outside there, the other side, and she just gets tickled. She starts laughing. And after she's sitting there, after I'm waxed, after Moses, I pleasure my Lord, being old also, basically, how could I have a child and all this? And the Lord said unto Abraham, wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I be sure of a child, which am old? And then in verse 14, he gives us a verse there that says, is anything too hard for the Lord? Now, again, is it too hard? Well, the answer is no, nothing's too hard for the Lord. Even a child born into Sarah that should not be born. I mean, that's not the normal thing to happen for people that's that old, even in the days. Now, this is way past the flood age. Now, the pre-flood age, people was having children quite often at that age because of the world that they lived in. This is the post-flood world. This is the post-Noah world. People were not living as long. People were growing old quickly now. The effects of the sin nature, the atmosphere had changed. Everything was different. So people were not living the length of years they did before. And so when she was reached 90, this was not something that it wasn't possible into their world, just like into our world, okay, that we live in. So it's a different. And she laughed, but he said, is anything too hard for the Lord? You see, when we think about things in the Bible, when it says it's impossible for us to see it come to pass without God. And so sometimes there's miracles happen when God's involved. God sometimes heals people miraculously from sicknesses, and doctors don't understand why. Is anything too hard for the Lord? No, it's not too hard. Does he always do things? No, but is it too hard? No, he doesn't always do, but it's not too hard. The one who has the power of life, the one who has all authority, can do anything that he so desires. And see, his desire and his plan was for Abraham and Sarah to have a child. And he intentionally made sure they were just past age, so that no one could get credit but God. Do you understand that? That's the reason he didn't answer this prayer earlier. He could have answered this prayer years ago. He could have let this come to pass many years before. He says, no, I'm going to do this so that you'll have no doubt who's in control. And I like this. At this time, appointed, I will return unto thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. I'm going to come back next year, and you're going to have a son. And Sarah denied, said, I laughed not, for she was afraid. Said, oh, but you did laugh. It's funny, isn't that just the way we do sometimes with God? Well, I really didn't say it. And God said, oh, yes, you did. We try to hide things from God too, don't we? And Sarah just did that too. And God knew that. And the men rose up from thence and looked towards Sodom. And Abraham went with them to bring them on the way. And then the Lord stops. Now here's again where we see the Lord capitalized with Jehovah. The Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham the thing which I do? And basically Abraham had a visit from God in order not only, it was more just to come and have some young calf and some bread and butter, but he was to give a message there. But he also wanted to tell them about an impending judgment coming. And the reason he wanted to do that I believe, is because Lot lived there, his nephew. And so God stops, and this angel of the Lord stops, and basically talks to him about this situation that was going to take place in Sodom, the destruction of Sodom. he says, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment. And the Lord may bring upon Abraham which he hath spoken of him. God said, I'm going to honor you because you're a man of God. And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it which is coming to me, and if not, I will know. And the men turned their faces from thence and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood yet before the Lord. And so, he'd give a message that their sin is great, and he understood that he was going down there, and he was going to send these angels before him. Then actually the two angels went, we see at Sodom, and they were going to carry out the mission of destruction. There was angels of destruction. Now the men of Sodom and Gomorrah were very wicked, and evidently the sin had become so great that God said, I'm not going to let it continue anymore. We don't know the reasons and ways of God. I'm sure there was other wicked cities in the land, but for some reason this was even greater. And sometimes God will selectively even judge one, let all the others know what his feeling is on that subject. It's just like when Ananias and Sapphira lied in the church in Acts chapter 5. Has there other people in the church that has done that same kind of sin over the years that has not been struck dead? Well, yes. But God made a point to say, this is what I think of that hypocrisy. The sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was very bad, and he was going to make a statement about that. And that has become such a statement in the book of Genesis here. It was used later on in different places about God's intentions concerning sin and judgment. And so, but the next thing we see, though, is Abraham interceding for the nation, for the place, for the sake of his nephew. And Abraham drew near and said, wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? And so he said, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? Would you spare if there was enough righteous people in there? And so the rest of this chapter is God and Abraham back and forth. Now, Abraham was persistent in this. It was intercessory. He was going on behalf of the other. And he was very definite, specific, what he wanted. He was very reverent. And he had faith that God could do this thing. And so basically, as we see through here, he goes down and he starts, would you destroy the city? There's 50 righteous people in the city. And down through here, God says, well, if I can find 50 righteous, I'll spare the city. But then Abraham got to think, well, Lot's not been, I don't know about Lot, he's not been a real strong Christian. Well, maybe let's go down to 40, and then 35, and 30, and finally he goes all the way down to 10. Because he says, well, surely there could be 10. Got to be Lot and his wife. He's got a couple daughters, a couple son-in-laws, and surely they don't have to get 2 or 3 on his side. And so 10 should be enough. And so he stops and said, surely for 10 people would you spare the city? And God says, for 10 righteous, I'll spare the city. And Abraham stops there. I think he was assured, well, 10's going to be all right. And we'll see God spare the city. It says there at the end of this, and the Lord went his way as soon as he left communing with Abraham, the communication, and Abraham returned into his place. So this is an interesting chapter. It's got God and 2 of his angels, the Lord, a theophany, a Christophany there, appearance of Christ, the Old Testament with his 2 angels, and they're angels of war. We think about angels. There's different types of angels. There's angels that are announcement angels. There's angels that are assigned to the throne to just talk about the holiness of God. There's guardian angels that watch over us. And then there's some angels that come with war. These are the warrior angels. And they're used for God to bring down His judgment. And we see these later in the Scriptures. We see them in the end times, at the last times in the tribulation period. We see these angels of war. In chapter 19, we're back to pick up the story. There came two angels to Sodom at evening. Now Lot sat at the gate of Sodom. I underline that because that's important now because of Lot's position, isn't it? Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself and he faced toward the ground. It's interesting. We believe that Lot understood these were angelic beings here as we get started into the story. But he was now involved with the city council, and I really believe that Lot, he was known for his compromise here, and I don't think he was on the city council in order to try to bring righteousness back to the city. I think he was just going along with their sin. He wanted the prestige of that. He wanted the power of that. There's a little sidebar there, if you have the notes on page 22, the path of compromise. That's an interesting little study on there. And here's the compromise of the steps of how Abraham was with Lot together those years. Now he's at the gate of Sodom. First of all, he looked longingly at Sodom. Remember, we looked at it Genesis 13:10. He looked longingly toward this wicked city. And then he chose the area of ground near Sodom. He went close to it. He saw the city, then he moved close to it, and then he pitched his tent towards Sodom. That means he was, and that's an idea that he wanted to be a part of the city. He was longing for the life. And I don't think that the city of Sodom just went vile in the last year or two. I think it was known for that type of living. I mean, it's not like, after Lot got there, this thing fell apart. I think it was a mess before he got there. I think it was a vile city, a wicked city. That's the reason even that earlier when Abraham rescued his son or his nephew in the battles there that involved Sodom, he didn't even want to talk to the king of Sodom. He didn't want to make any deals with him. He said, I don't want your stuff. I don't want anything agreement with you. So they were known for a bunch of wild, wicked, vile, sexual perverted people. Okay, that's what they were known for. You know, it's amazing, even some people call themselves Christians, sort of desire. I said, they just want to see how close they can get incorporated into that world stuff. Lot was like that. And then he moved into the city. We see him in the city. He didn't want to just live in the suburbs anymore. He wanted to live right in the action. You know, he wanted to live on Bourbon Street. He wanted to be right there, didn't he? And then in the story in Genesis 19, he had taken their ethics, he's taken their morals to the point when these, that we're going to see here, when the men of Sodom was trying to get these angelic men. Remember, these angels here look like men because that's what they referred to them as, and they wanted to have all kinds of immoral acts with them. And Lot had picked up the morals of Sodom so much, he offered his two daughters to them. I mean, how low can you get in the world that he lived in? But that's the world of compromise. It always starts, it doesn't start with that terrible actions. It begins with the eyes wandering a little bit toward that direction. You know, there's been many a Christian who's got way off track by just little increments. Little increments. Lot got way off track. And Lot was saved. The reason I know that is because the New Testament refers to him as righteous Lot. Now, he wasn't acting righteous, but he was saved. He knew God. But his sins will cost him. This morning we talked about, you know, he was not going to go, what he was going through wasn't trials, it was consequences. His family was going to be decimated. Was it God just doing this because he wanted to teach? No, it's the consequences of his action. He wouldn't have been in this situation. He wouldn't have had any problems. So as we go through the story here in this chapter of the Bible, we see that He brings them in, and he fixes them, and it says unleavened bread, and they did eat. So that's normally not something they would eat as much. Maybe they thought they were these angelic beings, and he was trying to offer them what would be considered a little different, maybe a holy bread. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house about both, the people from the quarters, and they called him Lot and said unto him, where art the men which came to thee this night? Bring them out that we may know him. Just perverted group of people. And then in verse 8, here's where he said, I'll give you my 2 daughters. What a terrible, what kind of father would do that? Well, a father that's way off track. That's what it is. It's someone who's had his compass turned all upside down. It's someone who no longer was online with God. When you get off, just even look at the life of David there for that little period in his life when he got off whack. Well, he did all kinds of things that wouldn't be right. Immorality and murder and all that stuff. What happens? When you start getting your mind away from God, you can start acting totally opposite of what a Christian should act like. And we see it happening here with Lot and his family. But the angels now they said, okay, we're going to start putting back. And so, as we see here, the angels smit the guys with blindness. That was the first act here that God. And as soon as he did that, Lot should have realized, uh-oh, these are some powerful men here. This is some angelic beings here. We better be careful about. At that time, you'd think that his family, his wife, the son-in-law said, oh man, we better get our act together. And but he couldn't get his son-in-laws, which were people of Sodom evidently. They couldn't get them to even come out of the city. Lot went out and spake unto his son-in-laws, which married his daughters, and said, up and get this out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his son-in-law. He just said, Lot, you're a fool. We're not leaving this place. This is where it's happening. There's not going to be any judgment. There's not going to be. Isn't that sort of the way if Christians talk about people, you need to get right with God. One of these days, the Lord's going to bring judgment, and they just laugh at you. They say, you guys are nuts. We've got a strong world to live in. We've got an enlightened world. We're in a thing now. Our morals are, the world we live in is not much different than the Sodom world. And you warn people, they mock at it. That's what they did. They was mocking. And the morning rose, and when the angels hastened to Lot, saying, arise, take thy wife and the 2 daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, you think that here's these angels saying, hey, God's going to destroy this place. You'd say, I'm going to get my coat, I'm going to get out of this city. I'm going to grab my family and my wife, and I'm going to get out of this city. But he lingered. And the men had to lay hold upon his hand, upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his daughters. The Lord be merciful to him, and they brought him forth. And the angels had to pull these people out of the city. It's evidently the Lord has said these angels, says you got to get them people out. Whether they want to come out or not, for the sake of Abraham, my servant. It's for his love I'm asking you to bring them out of there. His love for the people, his love for his nephew, his love for that family. I want you to bring them out of there. Did they deserve to come out of there? Not really, because they were just as guilty as the rest of them. But these angels said, okay, guys, get out of here. We're taking you out here. Grabbed them by the neck and grabbed them by the hands, and out they went. And they brought them about, and they got out of the city, and they was going to go to the mountains, and actually they ended up in the city of Zoar, and they went to flee from it. And let me go on down here. This whole chapter here has got a lot in it yet. And then after he gets them out of the city, the Lord, notice, not by just some kind of happenstance, it was the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Brimstone is normally always associated with some kind of judgment. I don't know exactly what it was. I don't know whether God was raining meteorites or just, I don't know what was coming down. Brimstone and fire. It was planned. It was, you're talking about, this is the first smart bomb attack. I mean, it's just Sodom and Gomorrah. And And he overthrew those cities and all but the plain and inhabitants of the cities. Now look at this. They were warned not to even look back. You know the verse in chapter 20, verse 26. And his wife looked back. His wife looked back. She loved the city so much. She loved the sin so much. And God judged her too for looking back. Later on in the New Testament, in God warning us not to look back, he brings this up and says, remember Lot's wife. Remember Lot's wife. You know what? As a Christian, we're never to look back at the world that we've saved out of. We're never to gaze back at it. And see, that looking back was a yearning for it. The old saying, there was a saying, you could take the boy out of the farm, but not out of the boy. You could also say this, you can take a worldly person out of the world, but you can't take the world out of a worldly person. It takes the Lord's inner life to take that out. It takes regeneration. And there's no indication that Lot's wife was anybody but a lost person. There's no indication of it. You don't see her involved with the helping of the angels. You hear her wanting to stay there. I think Lot was lingering. I think he was probably lingering, hoping to get his family out. And they wouldn't get out until they pulled him out of there, but the angels pulled him out. But you see, his morals even affected his daughters. If you know the story here, after they got out of there for a while, then the daughters actually got his father drunken and had a child. Each of them had a child by this. Now, where did they learn that? Well, good old dad taught them that. He lived in a wicked city when that was acceptable. You see, they had no standards and morals. They had no rights and wrongs in Sodom. If a family wanted to do that, if somebody wanted, that's fine in Sodom. That's the world of Sodom. We live in that kind of world today, and we're going to see the consequence of that someday in this country. We've got people that lead our nation who thinks that anything's all right. From the president right down to so many of the people in our land, that anything's all right. If that's what you want to do, that's just like Sodom. That's just anything's all right. And Lot now, he had his children. They became some of the future enemies of Abraham's people, the Moabites and the Ammonites. They were always a thorn in the flesh to the children of Israel later on. Where'd they come from? Because of the sinful practices of Lot and his family. So we see this story unfolds, and it's what a terrible story of what takes place for a family that. I'm going to go back there. I think about Abraham there in verse 27, 28. And Abraham got up early in the morning in the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the lands of the plain. And behold, lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of the furnace. He lived on the west side there, and it was on the east side, and he could see the smoke rising from the city. I know his heart must ache. At that time, he didn't even know if Lot maybe got out or nothing. He just knew that the city had been destroyed. He realized at that point that God couldn't even find 10 people as righteous. Well, he must have had a broken heart for his nephew and his family. But there's the consequences of sins, the consequences of ungodly living, and the Lord would have spared him. He's a merciful God. But yet, we see the consequences of our actions. So chapter 18 and 19 has both some very good things of the Lord coming before Abraham and announcing the birth of the child right down the road now. There's going to be a baby in the house. Get the nursery ready. And here it comes in just a short time. We're going to get to that pretty soon in the story. But we also see a very sad time of judgment. And God does not delight in judgment. God delights, I believe, in restoration. And God would have much rather see the nation or the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah repent. I think He would have much rather spared the city. God doesn't delight in destruction. I think He delights when people respond in a positive way to His truth. I think God's still the same way today. I think God is still very much a God who would like to be able to restore people to Himself. Restore families and churches and people and nations. Unfortunately, we know that many are not. And Sodom and Gomorrah stands as a warning. In fact, in the New Testament, it looks back to us and remember that. So when God says destruction comes, He gives us a picture of what destruction can look like and what will happen for those who constantly refuse to repent.